The swan is a majestic bird which has always had a fascination for its admirers. It was once reserved for the royal table on account of its taste. Today, it's a wild bird protected by law. But it still has a fascination for one man who specializes in rescuing swans he says are at risk.
Hello, Mr. Lewis.
David Lewis runs what he calls the British Wildlife Hospital Rescue Centre in a remote spot between Lampeter and Aberaeron in Dyfed. This is where he keeps the swans he collects from the wild. But he refused to allow us inside his fence to film his wildlife hospital.
Just an ordinary rescue centre. I mean, what other people have said, that's our legal problem. We've got to clear these matters up, look. I mean, I don't know what the hell's going on.
How many birds have you got here at the moment? 200. I remember you saying there were 400 when I was here
Well,
before,
we don't know, without a count. I'm going to say about 200, 300.
Yeah. How many swans are here now?
I can't disclose that. That's the problem.
We were trying to find out what has happened to all the swans Mr. Lewis has collected over the years.
I'm not talking about swans. If I start talking about swans, I'm going to drop myself right there. I can't do anything about that.
Mr. Lewis arrived in West Wales to set up his wildlife hospital 5 years ago. But he'd started his collection of animals and birds 3 years earlier at Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. He built up his menagerie on what used to be a plot of waste ground, and his activities left a strong impression in the area.
In his caravan that he lived in there was a budgerigar in a cage, a blackbird, an owl, 2 owls, a frog, toads, 12 or 14 chickens in a box, and a swan that was allegedly dying from lead poisoning. That was in the caravan that he lived in with his wife and 2 sons, and a dog, by the way.
On this site, since improved, he was also amassing swans.
There were some 40 swans in an area some 16 foot by about 10, so they were sort of all cramped up together.
The mute swan is the commonest type of swan seen in Britain, but bird experts have begun to worry about its numbers. They need open water and secure nesting sites to breed successfully, and they suffer from pollution and disturbance. Their future is no longer taken for granted.
They have problems in the wild at the moment. Their conservation in Great Britain is giving conservationists like myself cause for concern. And something, it's because it's such a familiar bird, because everyone's aware of this big white swan in the countryside, we tend to forget that perhaps there are as few as 3,000 pairs of them in Great Britain. So it's not a common bird.
The gathering of swans by Mr. Lewis from the lakes and rivers of Gloucestershire ran into opposition. Ted Lane, who owns a local taxi business, had been inside Lewis's centre. He was disturbed by what he saw and led a campaign to stop Mr. Lewis taking any more swans. He wanted to put a curb on his activities.
He was being drummed out of the area by complaints from the Cheltenham Parks Authority, complaints from the RSPCA. His funds were drying up. He wasn't getting the donations in that he was looking for. He left our area taking 42 swans with him. He had taken something like 30% of the county's swans down to Wales.
At the end of 1985, Mr. Lewis arrived in Wales. His project had been rescued by an anonymous benefactor who bought him a bungalow and an acre of ground to house his collection of wildlife.
I think swans are marvellous. I mean, a lot of people think they're very aggressive, but I get on well with them.
Mr. Lewis set up only a few miles from a well-established wildlife hospital outside Newquay. Alan Bryant, a retired civil engineer, has built up an expertise in treating sick birds and animals, especially those suffering from pollution at sea. He and his wife, Jean, have run the hospital for 20 years. They're continually brought sick creatures to care for. so they welcomed the arrival of another hospital, which they thought would help to share the load.
We were delighted, we were thrilled to bits. We've had other places set up in Pembrokeshire particularly, doing the same sort of things as we do. And, we're delighted. We've done everything we can to help them. And we tried our best to help Mr. Lewis.
But the conditions inside the new wildlife centre soon caused Mr. Bryant to change his mind. He began to doubt Mr. Lewis's ability to look after the swans.
He showed absolutely no knowledge to me of any sophisticated treatments for anything. And he made it quite clear that he never released his birds. Let them go, he said, and they'll get into trouble again.
The box contains a cormorant they've nursed back to its normal weight. The Bryants take a great deal of trouble to release the birds they've treated back to the wild. They argue that wildlife hospitals should not keep any animal for long.
He's not getting birds back into the wild. How many he treats successfully and gets fit, I don't know, but he tells me that he doesn't release them. This is criminal. This is absolutely wrong. The whole raison d'etre of a bird hospital, wildlife treatment unit, is to get things fit and get them back into the wild. And he doesn't.
The cormorant is free again, but Mr. Lewis's swans were fenced in, and they soon attracted trouble from their home in Gloucestershire. Ted Lane and his family turned up outside the new premises, demanding the return of the birds. Mr. Lane took out a private prosecution, alleging unlawful possession of wild swans. He and his daughter went on a 142-mile sponsored walk from Gloucestershire to Aberaeron to pay for the case.
The day before the court case in Wales, he came to me and said, OK, I accept what I'm doing is not right. I'll release them all, and I won't do it again. I'd have been quite happy. I just wanted him to stop from taking the wildlife out of the wild and just having it as a private zoo.
But in court, Mr. Lane's private prosecution failed. His key witness, a vet from Gloucester, was not allowed to give evidence because of a mix-up over the dates on the summons. The chairman said it would be unsafe to convict on the evidence before the court. The charge was dismissed. But the outcome of the court case did not stop further concern about the welfare of the birds in Mr. Lewis's care. The Bryants tried to get something done.
We've told the RSPCA about this. We've asked them on repeated occasions to do something about it. They may be trying to do something for all I know. We don't know.
On a number of occasions, we weren't allowed in. We were told to contact his solicitor. But since then, I have managed to gain his confidence and have been in, but not recently again.
Have you any powers to enter the premises?
None without invitation.
When the RSPCA did get in, they were not happy with what they saw inside.
It was cramped and overcrowded, the pond not big enough for the number of birds and wildlife there. But in general terms, the welfare of them did not seem a great concern at that time. He seemed to be as if he was able to look after them, although we weren't happy entirely with the conditions.
There had never been any planning permission for the creation of a wildlife centre on the hillside above Gloucestershire, so the local authority, Ceredigion Council, ordered it to close. The chairman of Ceredigion Planning Committee said the centre was stinking, but the owners appealed against the closure notice and a Welsh office inspector visited the site. As a result, Mr. Lewis was allowed to keep his wildlife sanctuary going. But because of the narrow lane leading to the site, he was not allowed to go ahead with plans to open it to visitors. One plan was for a field study centre for students. Notices were already circulating inviting visitors and their donations. The leaflets detailed a 24-hour, 7 days a week rescue service and said he specialised in swan rescue. But Mr. Lewis rescues more than swans.
He actually went to Newport in Gwent to pick up a chaffinch. And that seems rather silly to me. I mean, there are other people in that area who could have taken the bird. But he has said that he will go anywhere, anytime, to pick up anything. And he does just that.
He was going to various parts of the country and picking up swans, which was causing concern in the areas they were removed from.
At St Bride's Major in Mid Glamorgan, the village pond has been home to generations of swans which normally nest there year after year. The birds are a popular sight with villagers and visitors, but in recent years both swans and cygnets have been vanishing. This alarmed the local community council.
There was a Mr. Lewis that took these cygnets. He said there wasn't enough food in the pond for them, so he took them away. Then he came along and took the other one. But this is on one occasion, but then 2 years later, exactly the same thing happened again. The same person came back and he took 2 cygnets.
On this occasion, the villagers were so angry about what Mr. Lewis had done that they called the police to the pond.
The police were here and they arrested him and took him into the police station, and he was questioned, but he was released, and he maintained he had a document signed by a vet. We don't know who the vet was, we never heard of him, but it said that there wasn't enough food in the pool for the swans, and it was in their interest for them to be taken away.
Mr. Lewis maintained that he was rescuing the swans from danger because the pond water was polluted. He said the swans needed treatment and would suffer if left to fend for themselves.
If there had been anything wrong, swans are not stupid birds. They keep coming back, and if there was something wrong with the water, they wouldn't stay.
What was the feeling in the village when the swans had gone?
Outrage. Outrage that someone should have taken them, and without any authority whatsoever.
News of the swans' removal from St Bride's Major reached the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. They established that at least one of the swans taken from the pond had been perfectly fit.
Mr. Lewis had taken a swan from this particular pond. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the swan whatsoever. Mr. Lewis accepted that, and the RSPB chose not to prosecute him. He admitted his involvement, and the RSPB warned him about these particular activities. We would much prefer to do that, educate people of their responsibilities to nature conservation law, rather than prosecute.
But the villagers were impatient for action. The community council wrote to Mr. Lewis. They warned him that a delegation would be sent to his centre to bring back the missing swans to St Bride's Major.
We received a letter from him to say on no account were we to go to Lampeter, and if we did, he would, I don't think it was to have us arrested, but he was going to sort of take great care that we did not take the swans.
These are the swans that Mr. Lewis does not wish the world to see. In a telephone call, his wife admitted that the pond was an eyesore. Mr. Lewis claims that none of the birds are fit to be free.
I've got proof that that bird that I took was sick, and I've still got records of it being sick, and it's since died.
But I've talked to people at St Bride's Major in Glamorgan, where you've taken swans. You accepted a caution for illegally taking a wild bird from that lake, from the RSPB. Did you not?
Under our solicitor's instructions.
But
Because I was set up.
Well, you actually accepted a caution from the RSPB that you'd illegally taken the swans from the wild and kept it here against the law.
I didn't keep it against the law, it was safe.
How do we know?
Check on our vets.
Then you returned to St Bride's Major and took a further swan from them.
I've taken lots of swans from there.
Where else have you taken swans from?
I'm not supposed to say that. Anyway, I've got nothing else to say.
Mr. Lewis, you have a reputation that you go round, you collect birds from the wild under your self-appointed rescue service, because I can find no record of you having any authority from any recognised body. This is purely self-appointed.
Why should it have to be recognised?
I mean, who gives you the authority to take birds from the wild?
Nobody. You can take birds from the wild.
No, I can't. It's against the law.
No, it's not. You've got
The law is quite clear. You're not allowed to take a wild bird and keep it. This is what you're doing. The law on wild birds is governed by the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981. That made it an offence to take any bird from the wild. It's also an offence to keep any wild bird, whether alive or dead.
We have this hands-off policy towards our wildlife. So any person taking a bird from the wild, for example, quite simply commits an offence. But there is a big but here. If a wild bird has been disabled, then you can take it from the wild to tend it, but only for so long as is necessary before it can be released back to the wild again.
No, they're all under arrest. I've got a certificate to say they're sick.
Could you see that?
We'll check with the vets
Who is the vet?
in Aberystwyth.
What's his name?
How's the cat, Laurie?
She's better now.
Is she?
Howell Williams is one of the partners in a vet's practice at Aberystwyth, 22 miles from the Lewises. We asked him about the health of the swans.
The ones were to be rechecked are looking very well, and have certainly put a lot of condition on since the time we originally saw them, where they were very light and in poor condition.
Is there any reason you think why these couldn't be returned to the wild?
Some of them can return to the wild, one or two of them can't.
Have you ever been to see the sanctuary he runs?
No. We haven't been down there to see the where he keeps the animals, no.
All these birds rather are taken regularly to the vets and looked after. I go over there quite often in the week. Once, twice, 3 times a week.
He brings an animal once every sort of 4 to 6 weeks. It varies. We might not see him for a couple of months, and then for a while he might bring 2 or 3 within a week or so.
Mystery also surrounds the funding of the centre. The new van and its equipment are worth £10,000. But we calculate the total cost since the move to Wales to be in excess of £100,000. Mr. Lewis has made public appeals for money. One had a target of £50,000. But no one knows how much money was collected or how it's all been spent.
You appeal for donations. You have no other means of support. You don't produce accounts.
I've got support. I've got people that support us entirely on that purpose to keep us off the road. I'm not disclosing who that is.
Well, this property is in the name of a Miss Eileen Reid of Cheltenham.
His words were,
that's
"You've found something out then, haven't you?"
Does she provide the money for the van?
I'm not saying nothing.
We went to Cheltenham because Mr. Lewis's prime source of income is still to be found there. He's supported by money from 2 elderly women. They're both retired lecturers who live in the same street in the suburb of Charlton Kings. Miss Margaret Peach lives at number 29, while down the road at number 14 is the bungalow of Miss Eileen Reid, who paid to set up the hospital in Wales. We film Mr. Lewis arriving in his van on one of his regular Thursday visits to see his supporters in Cheltenham. He meets both women at the house of Miss Peach, where he usually spends a couple of hours before returning to Wales. The visits often include a short trip away from the house with Miss Reid. In recent weeks, Mr. Lewis has been making the 300-mile round trip to Cheltenham more regularly than his visits to the vet.
How much money do they provide you with, Mr. Lewis?
Enough to keep us going.
They keep you going quite satisfactorily, do they? This is several thousands of pounds you must have had from them.
I can't comment on that.
And have they've never been to see what they're spending the money on?
No.
What do you, what do you tell them?
Well, anything we want or put on the hospital, we do. And now I've got to go because I've got to meet my son.
How much money have you had from them altogether, Mr. Lewis? Must be a small fortune, Mr. Lewis.
No.
The frequent trips to see the 2 women have been of concern to Mr. Lewis's old opponent in Cheltenham, Ted Lane.
They're probably so convinced that they are doing an awful lot of good with their money, or he's doing an awful lot of good with their money. And you can't really take that away from them. I don't suppose for 1 minute they've actually seen the state of the place.
They've not been down there.
They've not been down there.
Lewis agrees they've not been down there.
And I would imagine if they did go down there, it would be a hell of a shock for them.
We approached the principal benefactor, Miss Eileen Reid. We wanted to ask about the money that Mr. Lewis collects from her, but she did not wish to say anything. A further mystery surrounds the fate of swans taken to the centre. He arrived with 42 and has captured at least a further 15. But a year ago, there were only 19 on the pond, and on the day we filmed, just 14 were visible.
Considering how stressed they must be when they're all compressed like that, and grossly overcrowded, in my estimation, for long periods, I can't imagine that they've lasted.
A number of people have seen dead swans at the centre. We have a statement from Jeff Crocker, an electrician who rewired the centre and has since left Wales. Mr. Lewis told Mr. Crocker he was called the Swan Doctor, and anybody throughout the country who saw a swan in trouble would call him, and he would go out in his white swan van and rescue them. Mr. Lewis claimed he was licensed to bring them back to good health. Mr. Crocker saw a chest freezer in an outbuilding. He says this large freezer was 3/4 full of dead white swans. Mr. Crocker estimated there were 7 dead swans in the freezer.
We know you came here with 42 swans. We know you've been collecting more. I've seen 19 here. What's happened to the other ones?
We released them back. They fly off.
Why were a number of dead swans found in your chest freezer?
Who's told you that?
Well, it's been seen by 2 people. A chest freezer here full of dead swans. How did they come to be there?
Then you better talk to our solicitors. I won't get you in as well.
Why did the swans die, Mr. Lewis?
Die.
Well, if they're in the chest freezer, they're dead.
I'm not answering that.
Once he's got birds in there, they can't breed. They're lost to nature. They're lost to the environment. They might as well have been put down.
I think Lewis ought to be closed down, unless he is prepared to learn how to look after wildlife and have contact with vets and try and learn something about how to look after them.
Does the RSPCA send injured or sick animals to his centre?
No, we don't. Because of the perhaps past controversy, we would not wish to perhaps give the appearance that he was RSPCA approved in any way.
He has accepted his guilt in some quite serious conservation offences, and as far as the RSPB is concerned, that, I think, sums up the level to which we want to criticise Mr. Lewis. He accepts he has broken conservation laws.
Wildlife hospitals are usually run by volunteers with a passion for caring for animals. They are springing up in Wales without any framework of regulation or inspection.
Anyone can start up a bird hospital, and we are plumbing to get them, if the government could put a clause in somewhere, to have all these hospitals registered and have them regularly inspected, or random checks, which we would welcome very much.
In West Wales, there's already a heavy demand for the welfare work of the RSPCA. Now the local inspector is seeing one wildlife refuge after another opening on his patch.
There's only Mr. Lewis that operates his wildlife hospital as such, but there are other sanctuaries that deal with cats, dogs, birds, seals, hedgehogs, and I believe now even bats and things of this nature, and of course badgers. There are people, and otter protection. As it stands at the present, anyone, for whatever purpose, can open a sanctuary and run it without any control or regulation. I think it's time that they were all brought under the wing of a body or organisation which perhaps could regulate this and make sure that standards are properly maintained.
This spring, new swans have arrived to nest at St Bride's Major. The villagers are patrolling the pond to make sure they stay there.
We feel that they really are the village swans. They shouldn't have someone that comes right from Lancashire who feels that he should just come along and literally help himself.
Are you worried about their future?
Yes, we are very, very worried that the same thing is going to happen.
Are you keeping a watch on them?
We are keeping a very strict watch on them.